the G7 has come up with a plan to force Putin to fund the war against himself, granting Ukraine potentially $50 billion in additional funding. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about what's going on here. Okay, so this is a really interesting story and a classic example of very wealthy countries using their weird wealth generation schemes for good instead of to enrich their own pocketbooks, right? The G7 has agreed to loan $50 billion to Ukraine from frozen Russian assets. Now, to understand what exactly seems to have gone on, you've got to understand, first off, that Russian oligarchs and businesses don't like to keep their money in Russia for two main reasons. The first is that the Russian ruble is a pretty unstable currency, meaning that these businesses' ability to buy and sell goods over a period of years or months can be wildly impacted by fluctuations in the ruble, right? Imagine if you're trying to import iPhones, and in January, $1 million gets you 1,000 iPhones, but by March, $1 million gets you 750. You'd basically be unable to meaningfully plan your business going forward. So a lot of these countries like to keep their cash overseas. The second reason is because in autocracies, no one and nothing is more powerful than the leader. But in democracies, individuals and individual entities have rights and due process, meaning that in somewhere like Russia or Saudi Arabia, if you're wealthy, your assets can be seized by the government for any reason at any time, right? No one is more powerful than the man in charge. But in pluralist representative countries, individuals have rights and due process, meaning that your assets held overseas in those countries aren't going to be seized willy-nilly. There's going to be at least a court process. You're going to have a chance to defend yourself. There's going to be some kind of arbiter, and the law is going to supersede the desires and whims of that country most of the time. So those two reasons make it really, really lucrative for Russian oligarchs and businesses to keep their assets in Western banking institutions. As a result, though, well, when Putin started his war, they ran into a problem, namely that these countries froze Russian assets. Now, notice the word freeze is important in this story, right? Because freezing assets doesn't mean the Western government seized them, right? Instead, it means they simply said, listen, Russia, we're not going to take them, but you can't access them either because we know you're going to use them to fund a war. So these assets have been sitting for 2 years, over 2.5 years, in various accounts. These assets include cash money, but also securities like stocks, gold, and bonds. Now, you guys, if you pay attention to finances, you know that in the last 2.5 years, the returns on interest of money held in a bank account, many securities, gold, and even bond payments have all gone way up. That means that these assets, over $300 billion in total, are generating actually a lot of return. Now, this says that they're generating about 1% per year, but in a lot of cases, they are probably generating quite a bit more. So the G7 had a debate, and they said, listen, there's two ways we can do this. One side said, listen, take this $3 billion a year and give it to Ukraine. And we actually can infer how much money Ukraine needs to run its war, because as you might recall, when the United States was struggling to pass the aid agreement, $60 billion of aid, Lloyd Austin said it expects that aid package to allow Ukraine to continue to fight for about 18 months, which means that we can infer a $3 billion a month burn rate for Ukraine to sustain the war effort. That's interesting because $3 billion, right? This $3 billion a year would basically would cover the expenses of the war for about 1 month out of the year. That's pretty good. But after the war ends, this money is going to it's going to continue to go to Ukraine. And that's one of the problems the U.S. said. They said, listen, this $3 billion a year, it's going to be paid for 10 years, 20 years, right? This money isn't going anywhere, just like money in your bank account. It'll accrue interest if you keep it in there for decades. But the Ukraine war isn't going to last decades, and Ukraine doesn't need $3 billion in 2034. It needs money now to fight the war today. So the U.S. said, how about we do this? Why don't we loan the Ukraine the money, but the collateral and the payback is going to be with frozen Russian assets, right? So how big a mortgage could you get if you could pay $3 billion a year in payments? Quite a bit, right? So the answer is, of course, that you can get about $50 billion loaned to you if you can make $3 billion a year in payments, which again, at 1% is on the low end of these Russian assets held overseas. And so that's what the G7 have done. They've said, listen, we're going to have our either central banks or major financial institutions write a $50 billion loan, hand that cash to Ukraine, and the payment terms will be made by Putin's own assets, right? And $50 billion is a lot of money, guys. It'll either sustain the current war effort for about another 15 months, right? Let's see if we can get this right. Yeah, for about another 15 months, or it'll allow Ukraine to double its effort, not just fighting this defensive fight, but actually potentially pushing back against Russian forces. So this is a tremendous, tremendous asset to Ukraine. Now, if you're looking for your own tremendous advantage over whatever you're dealing with, you don't need to seize your enemy's bank accounts and push them. You just need some strike gum, right? Strike gum's got 90 milligrams of caffeine in every piece, 0 sugar. It's better than an energy drink in every single way, right? You can fit, this is the equivalent of 5 energy drinks, this little pack here, right? So you could throw it in your glove box, throw it in your car, throw it in your gym bag, keep one in the office so that when you need that midday pick-me-up or you need to crush your workouts, you just pop it, chew it, and go. And we're having a Father's Day sale. There is 0 shipping, free shipping on all orders over $40. So yeah, you definitely want to pick up either the tray or 2 of the 5 packs. The tray is going to be your best deal, especially with free shipping. So, but you can only get it on strikegum.com. I'm going to link that in the description. If you're on Amazon, you can get it on Amazon, but we can't do the free shipping there. So be sure to check it out. And thanks to everyone that's left us reviews on Amazon. That makes a huge difference. So the other thing I want to point out is that the G7 is a really interesting group. First off, Russia used to be a member until it annexed Crimea. And then they said, listen, we can't have the G7 annexing countries. So out you go, right? And then, of course, the G7 has a population of about 10% of the world population, but controls about 50% of global wealth. So that is kind of the leverage that this group has. And so when they want to do something, they have the power to do it. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you so much. Huge thank you to our Colonel tier members. Thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. Could not do this without you guys. Really, thanks so much. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.